Hi, and welcome to AXSChat. I'm delighted to welcome Rob Sinclair and Sharon Spencer to this week's chat. Rob was the first Chief Accessibility Officer for Microsoft and is also chair of the International Association for Accessibility Professionals, IAAP. Sharon is the CEO. We had IAAP on about a year ago, but there have been some significant changes, and I'm sure that a lot of the people that are involved in the accessibility industry or are consumers of the industry are very interested to find out what's going on. So thank you very much for joining us, Rob and Sharon. It's great to have you with us today. I'm very pleased that you could make it. And by the way, I'm just being corrected. Sharon is the managing director.
Promoted her.
That's right.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's right. No, thank you. We're really thrilled to be here today. So really appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Great to be talking with all of you.
Go on, Deborah.
You can say, well, I agree with Neil. I think this is a very important conversation. We have always supported having an accessibility association. We think it's very important to our industry. We obviously think it's very important that it be a global industry. So I have had the fortune to track a lot of the efforts that you're making and actually see some pretty cool things coming out of it. But I think a lot of accessibility professionals are not really sure what's going on, especially those outside the U.S. So we thought it was very important to bring you in, let you talk about what you're doing. Things are a little bit different now. For example, Rob, when we were putting together the marketing information, I was going to make you the board of directors, and then I realized really IAAP doesn't have a board anymore. So I think there's some things that we could just really clear up since we have so many followers on AXSChat, and also help our viewers understand, our community understand, how can they get more involved? How can they support you? Why should they be members and sponsors? Why does this matter? Why does this matter if I'm an individual working accessibility in Ireland? Why should I care? So, and if I'm a corporation like Barclays, we love Barclays, and Barclays is always on AXSChat. Why should Barclays, for example, or TD Bank or any other corporation or brand like Microsoft care about what's happening with IAAP? That's some of the things we hope to accomplish today, right, Neil?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, so why don't we start with Sharon? Why don't you introduce yourself? You have a very interesting history in our industry, and then let's let Rob talk more about what he's done. We're big fans of both of you, so welcome.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for having both of us. I'm excited to be here and to talk about what's going on, because I think there are some very exciting things going on, particularly with the merger of IAAP and G3ICT. But so you asked about me. So I actually, my entire career has been technology. I started with IBM. I was with IBM for 17 years. And so I've worked with a lot of large companies in the technology world, some small startups in the technology world. And back in 1999, I actually joined what was then Henner Joyce, now Freedom Scientific, the makers of JAWS. And so that's actually how I got into this industry. I started with Freedom Scientific as the VP of sales, and just had a great opportunity to work in this industry and really come to love this industry. And so about 10 years ago, I decided to start my own consulting business. And that's how in working with the Assistive Technology Industry Association and some of the projects that we were doing in partnership with the US Office of Disability Employment Policy, we came to realize just how important there was, how big of a need there was to help remove some of the obstacles that accessibility professionals were being faced with. And so that's really how IAAP was formed. And so I had the pleasure of working with Rob Sinclair and the other founders, a lot of great people to, define IAAP and, build the infrastructure. And we launched in March of 2014. And there's been lots going on since then that I'm excited to talk about. So that's kind of a quick, my background. I'm just thrilled to continue to be working with technology, but doing it with technology that makes such a difference in people's lives.
Thank you, Sharon. And Rob, aside from being a really quite competent amateur photographer, you've done quite a bit in the accessibility world too.
Oh, thanks, Neil. Yeah, and thanks again for having us today. And thank you for such a great intro there, Sharon, on kind of the history of how we got to here. Yeah, so for me, it's interesting because I started off as an engineer 20 years ago, trying to work with assistive technology vendors to figure out how to help them access Windows and Windows applications. So I started deep in the bowels of Windows, really, and as an engineer, and had a really fantastic path from there to here, where I was able to first do the technology, then start managing the team so I could help build some of the applications and the technologies. And then I had the opportunity to start running the corporate-wide program. And what was interesting along the way for me is that my own understanding of the space has grown constantly. And so originally as an engineer, I thought, oh, if I can just build the right API, then poof, we've solved the problem, because the AT can get the information from the application and voila, everything will be perfect. And of course, that's not the case. So as we've kind of gone down this path, for me, my path of realization in this area has been that, yes, you have to have the technology, yes, you have to have the right ATs and the right applications, and then you have to have the right content, and then you have to have the right people to put all of that together. And so it's not just about engineers. It certainly is a large part about engineers, but it's also designers, content authors, trainers, support, educators, business leaders. I mean, everyone in the entire gamut, because if you don't have the business leader bought in to get the right funding and people in place to do all the other creation of content and technology and deployment and training, then it doesn't work. And that, for me, is really what led me kind of to this continuous realization of more and more people needing to be involved, more job roles needing to be involved. Certainly not a one company problem or one country problem. And so it's just been fantastic for me. And of course, along the way, getting to know a lot of amazing people with or without disabilities who are working in this space. And so that's where we kind of collectively came to this point where we realized, wow, we really need to bring all of this together if we want to solve the problem at the global scale. And that really is how we got here. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And, Sharon and Deborah and Neil, you've all been fantastic along the way. And so it's just wonderful to be here to talk about it. Thanks.
One thing, when we first started talking as an industry, well, we've been talking about the need of a professional society for a long time. And I remember, as Sharon reminded me, in 2014 and before, when we do this, and we got a lot of sponsors and founders together. Neil, I believe ATOS was one of the initial founders of it as well. And a lot of really amazing people came together. I remember writing a blog about why I thought that we needed an accessibility association at the time. And I think when you're starting something from scratch, you think, oh, I know, we're going to go this direction. And that's exactly what we need. And that's what we did. I think we had some early successes, and then it got sort of confusing. And as an association, we thought maybe it would make sense to bring in a leader outside of the industry that had nonprofit experience. And, Christina Peck, which we had on, was an amazing, talented woman. But I think one thing we realized is that we actually needed to have somebody like Sharon that has been deep in the bowels of all of the different moving parts. And so I was really delighted to be able to attend the strategy meeting that y'all had back in, I believe, October in Maryland. And I was really impressed with the different people that were there from all over the world, and how, and I've always been a fan of G3ICT. And so I think there's a lot of work to do. I think also I watch as people say, oh yeah, we have a certification, and people move in and out of this, and sometimes it gets very confusing. I recently have been working with a one of my clients who desperately needs accessibility experts, and I find people that say they're experts and they interview them and they're like, Deborah, they never heard of ARIA, and they didn't know Section 508 had refreshed. And so, and of course, Neil runs a huge global organization with accessibility. So I just think more than ever before, we need this association. But I assume people have questions. For example, when we changed it, you know, Sharon, I was thrilled to see you take over the leadership, because I've worked for you before, and you were just really good at getting us to do things that sometimes I don't even want to do, but Sharon said I had to do it. So you're amazing, gifted to getting all of us to contribute. So blessings to you. And I love the continuity of Rob, your leadership following along, but you're doing things a little different. You're really focusing on certain things. You're really focused on making sure everything's accessible. You don't have a board of directors. So do you two mind talking about how have things shifted and changed, where we are, where are we now, and where are you going in 2017? And I know those are big questions, but sorry.
Well,
Yeah,
and I'll just, go ahead, Rob.
I was going to say, let me put one little piece in of just kind of a part of the rationale, and then I'll let you talk about some of the answers there, Sharon. So the one other piece is, you know, just to kind of sum up a little bit in case people are wondering, you know, what did happen in the old model and why did we shift here? Part of it is we were all very ambitious, and we wanted to solve, you know, put all of this in place at once, and it proved to be too much. And so we really are about focusing on a few really key investments and driving those forward. And also we moved to this new operating model with G3ICT, where we have much lower overhead. And so we are, I think, much more lean and much more efficient from an operational perspective. But we're also strategically very focused on addressing a lot of the key issues we really heard consistently, either from the board or the members. And that included things like, you can't just be US centric. You know, you really have to focus on helping those technology vendors make our sites accessible, which of course we were working with the entire time. But so there was just a real desire to really focus on a few key things. And I think it's pretty typical of any startup. You start off with a premise and an initiative of, you know, a set of initiatives you want to invest in. And as you go forward, you decide, is that the right mix? Can we afford to invest in all these things? And so that's where we were. And I'm really happy that everyone in the organization kind of had that courage to say, yep, we're not on the right path, so we're switching gears. So it's been great transition. And Sharon, yeah, why don't you answer some of those questions of where we're going and what we're doing?
Well, I thought it would be good to maybe just take a step back and talk a little bit about the new structure. So, you know, in July, IAAP and G3ICT merged. And I like to think of it as kind of a marriage made in heaven, because I think there's just such great synergy between the two organizations. G3ICT has such great contacts and relationships internationally that can help IAAP expand internationally and meet the needs of the international community even better. So talking about infrastructure, IAAP is now a division of G3ICT. And Deborah, I think you mentioned about we don't have a board. So we don't have a board from, you know, using the term board, but we do have what we're now calling a Global Leadership Council. And so all of the members who were on the original or the previous IAAP board are now members of the Global Leadership Council. And so we still have a great group of people like Rob Sinclair, who is, guiding the direction and making sure that our priorities are the right priorities. But, working with G3ICT, it made so much sense for these two organizations to come together, because when you look at the work that G3ICT has been doing, as they've been talking to, all the countries around the world, one of the biggest obstacles that they have found is, not enough skilled accessibility professionals to do all the work that needs to be done. And so, hopefully IAAP is making that contribution to the industry. And so, where are we headed? Our mission hasn't changed. Our priorities haven't really changed. We're still very focused on, helping the accessibility professional, help to improve, enhance the profession and promote the profession. And we do it, as our mission states, through education, networking, and certification. And so those are the three things that we're still very, very focused on. With the certification, we are hopefully very soon as June, about to launch the new Web Accessibility Specialist certification. So, we really see certification as a key component to this mission. And it goes back to some things that Rob, I think you mentioned, and Deborah, you mentioned, is just, we need to not only increase the number of people in the industry who have accessibility skills, but we need to have confidence in those people. And Deborah, I think you mentioned, hearing about people, or maybe it was your own experience, where there's, somebody said they were an expert and they really weren't. That was actually stories that we heard way back in 2013. Wow. As we were forming IAAP. We heard that over and over and over again. And so, we believe certification can really help drive credibility of the professionals in this industry, help guide as new people are brought in, help guide the training that they need to have so that they have the right skills. And then again, the certification assesses those skills. And then it all results in, growing this industry so that hopefully one day in the not too distant future, everything is accessible. Hardware, software, content, everything.
We can but hope. So I got interested in IAAP precisely for the reasons that have already been mentioned. I constantly interviewing people and trying to find people with the skills that I needed to fulfill the requirements of our clients and customers and people with disabilities, and finding that a lot of the candidates fell well short, and actually came to the realization that we needed to train our own. We started an apprenticeship and academy program, and we put people through that. We're going to be rerunning it again, because it's been great, but the industry needs a lot more people, and I was interested in joining the IAAP for those reasons, and Atos did join early on, and we continue to support and will continue to be members, precisely because we recognize that there needs to be some kind of standardization, and that people need to have some kind of trust in the industry, because it's an industry that was seen as immature, seen as unregulated, seen as slightly feral, if I'm honest, and we need to change that, especially working in the corporate environment where we have to be utterly professional about this stuff. I'd come from the assistive technology industry, a bit like Sharon. I'd worked for very small companies, and there was a reputation of assistive technology vendors being men in sheds inventing stuff, and as the industry matures, we need that maturity of a professional body alongside it. So I'm very much pro having the professional body. I've taken on board the fact that you're moving to become less of your worldview is less World Series, and us here on Airstrip 1, out on the other side of the Atlantic, are going to have a slightly more localized view. So I'm enthused that things are going in the right direction. So you're talking about the web competencies as the next certification. What about other areas? About particularly, I'm interested in deploying stuff in enterprise, in large organizations, because it's very, very different from both web accessibility competencies and also very different from a home user context. Is that something that IAAP are going to be addressing?
Let me tell you what our current priorities are, and then
okay.
we're getting so much interest in certification in so many areas. But so, as I said, right now we're actually working on refreshing the current exam, which is the Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies, CPAC, and refreshing that to make sure that we're really looking at the content from an international perspective of whether there's terms that we're using that maybe are not the most effective outside the US, making sure that there's already content that covers outside the US in the exam, but making sure there's even more. So we're really looking at that exam with an eye to ensuring we're meeting the needs of the international community. The next, as I said, is the Web Accessibility Specialist exam. And then after that, one of the things we've heard, particularly outside the US, is a request for a procurement specialist. So looking at it from the standpoint of ensuring that your vendors and your suppliers and the products that you're bringing into your infrastructure is accessible, and how do you assess that, and the person who's responsible for assessing that. And then the other demand that we heard was digital content. So having an exam for a digital content specialist. Beyond that, there's a long list. So I would love to hear more from you about what you think is needed, and we can just look at that and see how best to prioritize.
Absolutely. So I think procurement is a really key topic. I think it's one that is recognized as being key by a number of organizations that are trying to address it at the moment. So I know that several of the people that will be members of your organization will also be looking at this, encouraged by other organizations such as Business Disability Forum, Business Disability International, International Labour Organization. And what I am concerned about somewhat is that we've talked already about the limited resources we have within the profession, because we're trying to train up new people, is about making sure that we don't dilute those resources into duplication of effort, because we all know we want to do the same thing, and it's really about making sure that all of these bodies, which all have a place, I think, in the ecosystem around accessibility, try and coordinate as best as possible so that we're not duplicating effort and we're actually all pushing the agenda forwards.
I think that's really well. Yeah, and I think that's really well said, Neil. In particular, that's one of the principles that we're using to guide our effort as well. Is if another organization already has a great momentum in a particular area, then we are trying to. Then our goal is to not interfere with that. It's actually to draw attention to that and help drive people to be aware of the work they're doing, and then to coordinate with them. And so in the case, the other thing is, in addition to what Sharon said to your question around organizational development, we do have a group of people within the organization that are focusing. We're not doing certification or training at this point, but we do definitely have sort of a sub-community of people who are focused on this in their own organization and sharing best practices and looking at that, just so that they can actually help draw in all the great things that are already happening around the world in that space. But also, frankly, I think each of our own companies we're still trying to understand what is the most effective approach. We're trying things and we're sharing what's working and not working for us as well. So I think the communities, the discussions in the forums is also one of the ways we're trying to help at least add some value there as an organization.
And speaking of the community, Rob, I know that the community, you could feel the frustration level of the community before some of the changes that we've talked about had taken place. You could just, it was, some people were being very, and I monitor the community a lot because I find it very interesting, the conversations, and there's some really, really grounded, really great conversations happening now, which I think is really great. I also think that, and knowing Sharon for a long time, she's really good at this, but bringing in all of the stakeholders. So I know one of the partners that you brought in when you were doing the IAAP and the G3 ICT was the Georgia Tech, the AMAC program, to help bring in the university perspective of how do you really do certification? How do you tie training into that? You've leveraged a lot of the very talented accessibility vendors like the DQs, the SSB, the Paciello groups, the FUNCA, those organizations. But looking from the outside in, I think y'all have done a good job at providing, bringing in all the stakeholders, small business, individuals with disabilities, universities, and so I applaud those efforts. I think it's very important. Large business, as Neil's needs, your needs of two multinational huge corporations sometimes are going to be different from an Albert Rizzi, who has a tiny little accessibility company, and Albert himself is blind, or myself as a global strategist. And, how do I help guide clients in the right direction? And I'll tell you, in the United States, no surprise, I had a lot of customers coming to me saying, I did exactly what my accessibility professional told me to do, and I still got sued, not just once, but over and over and over again. Why am I getting sued? What is going on? And that's when I sort of try to encourage them to join the conversation. We're still in the tipping point. Join the conversation, and let's all participate so that we can move. It can't just be Rob, you, Sharon. It can't be the four of us. It's got to be all of us. And I think we all have to understand that boiling the ocean is a bad idea. We sort of learned that early on. But so tell me a little bit more about and why it's so important having all of the stakeholders, not just only the U.S. perspective, the global perspective, but all the different stakeholders as well, including universities.
Well, Sharon, maybe I'll start and then you can join in. It's really an important question, because I think, to your example of, there are so many cases where people do say, look, I did what I followed the whole checklist and I did what I was supposed to do, and it didn't work. I think part of this is because accessibility tends to be more art and science, and it requires both, than I think a lot of business leaders or people that are new to the space like to believe. Because there are so many different abilities and so many different technologies and so many different kinds of, I'll say, stuff. It's content, it's applications, it's media, there are so many different assets or things that people are trying to either share or consume or create that have to, ideally, if we want to get to that ideal state of everything being fully accessible and inclusive, it really is from the end to end, it all has to be very conscientiously designed and created and distributed in a way that ensures it is accessible. And so that requires, there are very few cases where one person or even a couple of people are taking something from conception all the way through creation and delivery. And especially in today's world, where you have all kinds of sharing and reuse of information. So for me, when people ask me this question, in my day job, it's the same answer. It's that, well, the business leader has to fund and give appropriate time for the right, perspective to be developed before you even start creating a video or an application or even a presentation or a marketing campaign. And so you need to start from the very beginning. Then everyone involved in that whole process needs to participate. if you really want to get that optimal outcome. And of course, there are shortcuts, and there is retrofitting that can happen, and often, I mean, usually does today. But of course, where we want to be is, think of it. I'll stop and I'll state it a different way. How many cases are there where a single team, has full control of the creation and delivery of what they're building? Almost always they're using, controls or widgets that were created by another team. Maybe they're open source, so they were actually created by a very broad and diverse set of people. Or they're reusing content or images or video feeds that were created. So are those captions, excuse me, do they have an appropriate alt text, for that? So there's so many different pieces of media and content that are put together. I think that's the best example I can use to explain why we need everyone. And then, educators are essential, because really what we need is the next generation of creators to really understand this deeply and inherently, why it's important and how to go about it. And then the third piece is everything's changing. The technologies that we're using today and the building blocks today are radically different than they were even 5 years ago, or certainly 10 years ago. And so this, I think, for me, was also why I personally concluded we needed a profession, or this association. Is, we all learn a certain set of things as we're going through school, and then we graduate and we enter the workplace. Well, technology and the world doesn't stop changing. And so once you're out of school, then how do you stay up to date? How do you find other people that have already solved the problem you're trying to solve, or who need to know how you solve that problem? This is, for me, I think, the essential reason that we need this kind of a forum and a group that's worldwide, is so that we can all share and continue learning together as the world around us changes and advances. And if anyone is wondering, where the next horizon is, just think about the Internet of Things and augmented reality and virtual reality, and that's all coming. And I think there are many, many unsolved accessibility challenges there. So, sorry, very long-winded.
That's okay.
That's great.
Definitely are.
That was great.
Definitely
Excellent.
are challenges in that area, but also great opportunities for
That's right.
empathy and training and enabling people to come together. So Sharon, I know you've probably got more to add.
Well, Rob did a great job of, really answering the question. I would just add, kind of going back to, the question was, why is it important to bring all the stakeholders together? And I just think about, when you think about the one key problem that we're trying to solve, which is, more skilled accessibility professionals around the world. So all the stakeholders play in that. Rob talked about education. If the schools aren't adding accessibility into the curriculum, we're not graduating people with the skills that we need them to have. We need everybody coming out with technology skills to have at least some level of understanding about accessibility. That only happens really when the universities start to hear the demand from the employers saying, we want people graduating with these kinds of skills. So you need the large, really all organizations to be looking to hire technology people, but looking for those as a part of the skills that they come in with. And, so it's really so many pieces of the puzzle that needs to come together in order for us to be successful. And so that's why it's so critical that we bring all the stakeholders together.
Yeah.
Agreed. So I know that we're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask one more question, then turn it, after y'all answer the question, turn it back over to Neil. But so if I am a corporation, and I'm like, Neil, like you, Rob, you're trying to run this huge, all these huge moving parts, or I'm an individual with a disability that wants to get engaged in accessibility, or I'm an accessibility professional, or I'm an educator, or take your pick. Why do I need to be part? how do I add value? Do I just join the community and start asking questions? Tell all the different listeners of the community, all the different stakeholders, why they should be part of IAAP and how they can add value.
I'll go first. No, I was going to say, well, hopefully they will become a part of IAAP, not only for the things that IAAP can offer to them, but what they can offer. And it's not so much to IAAP, but it's really to the industry. So, again, I think this is something that we all need to address together. I think there's a lot of benefit that the benefits of being a member is not just, members helping members, which we have seen through the IAAP Connections, the social collaboration tool. I just love seeing the conversations that are going on there where, one person has a question and somebody else around, somewhere else around the world has answered that for them. That way we are all more effective, more efficient in addressing and moving the accessibility ball forward. So I think there's a lot of benefit that the education, the certification, all of that comes together to help the individual, help the organization, the committees that we have where, again, there's a lot of sharing of best practices. We don't want everyone reinventing the wheel. The questions that people have, the challenges that people have, other people are also having those. And the more we can share that, the better off we're all going to be, so that everybody's not solving that problem over and over and over again. And I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that I haven't said to that, added to that. Rob, anything you would add?
I think you got it. The only other thing I would add is, it's a never-ending journey. I'm learning things. I continue to learn from the forums myself, and try to chime in, and not as often as I'd like these days, but it's great. And I guess the only thing I would add to what you said was, we are growing. I think we're starting to get more international perspective, and we're also starting to get I think, a good diversity of participants. So there's been some really good discussions around standards and techniques, and what are the pros and cons and what's required. And I think so we're going beyond just the kind of first layer of knowledge, and really people starting to look at the edges and the seams, and really discussing, well, what is it I really can do here, or how can I really solve this piece of the problem? Because the standard says these three things, but in my particular case, it's more complex for these reasons. And I think that discussion is so rich. It's just really, I think, valuable. And the only other one I would add is, also, I've seen people reaching out saying, hey, I need someone to help, work with a client or an organization in this part of the world. Can someone help connect me? So I think it's also turning into a great network of finding resources, not just information. So I think that's all I would add. Yeah.
Thank you. So we're at the end of our half hour. I maybe a little over. Oh well. But I'm really pleased to have got the update. I think it is really important for our profession to be looking to bring on that next generation, that next set of skills, and of course to be sharing. The whole premise behind AXSChat was for us to get out there and share the good message about accessibility. We think we've done a half decent job. We've still got work to do. So I look forward to everyone joining us on Twitter tomorrow night. I think it'll be a good conversation. Thank you very much, Rob. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.